Hello. In the next few minutes I'm going to be showing you how to install and use your taper tools on a small combination sander. These sanders are configured somewhat differently, but they have two things in common. One is a 6-inch sanding disc with a small platform, and they have a 4 by 36-inch sanding belt. There are several other manufacturers that make sanders in this configuration. These three do work. Some of the other ones that have these typical configurations should also work. If they don't have this configuration, I don't believe they will work. At the end of this video, I will be discussing in further detail some of the particulars of these three units. Hello, I'm Tim, and I'm going to be showing you how to set up and use your barrel taper tool on a small combination sander. Before we install the taper tool, we need to check the platen and the wheel to make sure they're ready to go. You need to put a straight edge on here and move it across. See if there's any high spots we can identify. There's nothing real visible. But just to be sure, I'm going to take a mill file and work it back and forth in length. What I found here was a couple of high spots, and now they're filed down to where they're not going to be an issue. The other thing we need to do is check that the wheel is not higher than the platen. If the wheel is higher than the platen, you will sand a hollow spot in your shafts and that won't work. So just take a straight edge, move it across the platen and over the wheel. This wheel is not moving, that wheel is not moving, and so that platen is fine. What I'm going to do is show you how you deal with raising a platen to get it up to an elevation where it's above the wheel. Here we have a sander that I've filed the high spots away on the platen. The metal here that you can see is the light colored spots. I've sanded through the paint and sanded off the high spots. The next thing we want to do is check the wheel to make sure that it is not above the platen. Here you can see as I run the straight edge across the wheel is rotating, so the wheel is higher than the platen, and we're going to have to take care of that. The way that we can do that is with a piece of graphite cloth. The graphite cloth is about a 1/16 of an inch wide, and it's available from several suppliers online. Just do a search for graphite cloth. If you do not get the platen above the elevation of the wheel, this is what will happen. I have my arrow shaft here tapered to about 5/16 of an inch here, and it is tapering up to the diameter of the arrow shaft, and you can see where some stain is still left. When we get up to here, we see that that's all light colored again, and that is an indication that we have sanded deeper, and in fact there's a little divot there, and that is where the arrow shaft was directly above that wheel. Now that our sander is ready to go, we're going to attach the taper tool to the sander. We will fasten the slotted wood pieces to the angle with a machine screw, washer, and wing nut, and then we will fasten that assembly to the taper tool with a brass thumb screw. We'll then take off the stop and the guide and set those aside. We'll put the taper tool on the sander, aligning this edge approximately with the end of the wheel, and clamp it in place. And I'm going to go ahead and square up this bracket. It doesn't have to be exactly square, but this one is. You want to line up the bottom of the angle approximately with the bottom here, and if you have to move it up and down a little bit, that'll be fine. The next thing we do is check behind and make sure we don't have any obstructions when we drill through this. That's fine. And so now we're ready to start drilling and attaching. We have our taper tool clamped to the back of the sander, and what we will do now is take a 1/8 inch drill bit or a number 29, which I happen to have, will work better. It makes a slightly bigger hole and it makes it easier to insert the tech screw. Insert the tech screw. If you used a 1-inch drill bit, you probably have to drive it in, back it out, drive it in, back it out a little bit. Also, if you don't want to use the tech screws, you can just drill through this with a 3/16 bit and use some number 10 screws with nuts and lock washers on the back side. Screw that back up. Drill another hole. Now on this back bracket, I've got a hole in the back of the sander where I would have the bracket if it's square. So what I'm going to do is just set it at a slight angle. I've already got a hole drilled there. Make sure it's cleaned out. Sort of tech screw. And one more. Now we're attached to the sander, and so what we'll do is turn this around, put the sanding belt back on it, and do a little bit more work, and then we'll be ready to taper. The next thing we need to do is get the shaft guide shaped to fit the sander. So we're going to go ahead and install that. We're going to leave about a 1/4 inch gap down at this end from the sander, and this end we're going to leave loose. We're going to lift it up, turn on the sander, and start sanding. This process is going to take quite a few minutes, so I'll shut off the video and go ahead and finish that job, and then we'll come back. The shaft guide has now been sanded to the shape of the sander. When I was doing that, I was pushing down here and watching this gap between the taper tool and the sand belt. You do not want to sand off the taper tool. I left about a 32nd of an inch gap between the taper tool and the sand belt. The other thing I've done is remove the 80 grit sand belt and replaced it with a 120 grit sand belt. The 80 grit belt that comes with the machine is a little bit too coarse, and it will leave scratch marks in your taper. If you use the 120 grit sand belt, it will leave you with a nice smooth taper, so it's worth the $6 or $7 to do that. Now we're ready to make some final adjustments on the taper tool. We're going to place an 11/32 blunt or field tip in this end of the taper tool and a 23/64 in at this end. To get that in easily, you just push on the opposite corner, slip it in there, make sure it's in good. Do the same at this end. Now what we're going to do is place 2 or 3 pieces of paper between the field tip and the sanding belt. We're going to do the same at this end. And then we're going to tighten the tool up. The reason we do that is to give ourselves a little margin for error, and also the sanding belt does tend to float up above the platen just a little bit sometimes. Reinstall the stop. If when you go to reinstall the guide, it's a little tight, doesn't want to go in, all you have to do is turn on your sander, push that in, and go ahead and install that. So now we're ready to taper some shafts. So we're going to go grab our best dozen shafts and get right to work. Well, no, let's not do that. It takes a little bit of time and you will probably make a few mistakes. I know I have, and I've ruined a few shafts getting these things set up. So what you want to do is use a shaft that you don't intend to use as an arrow. You can use a piece of a broken arrow as long as it's long enough. If you don't have either of those, you can get a couple of dowels, 3/8 inch dowels, and you can cut those in half and you'll have two ends to practice with. So let's do some tapering. So while we're setting up our taper tool, it helps to have either a stained shaft, or if you don't have one, you can take a raw shaft and make some pencil marks along that shaft. That way you'll be able to see how much wood is being removed from the shaft and how far along. So what we're going to do is take our gripper, put it in the grill, and put the shaft into the gripper. When I turn on the sander, I'm going to insert the shaft into the guide. As soon as that shaft enters the guide, you want to start spinning the drill. If you don't spin the drill and you push the shaft in, you're going to put a flat spot on that shaft and you're not going to be able to get that flat spot out. If you're using a corded electric drill, don't use it at full RPM because it spins a little faster than you need it to spin. So here we go. So as you're spinning your shaft, you want to watch down at this end, and when you see most of the sawdust quit coming out, then you know you've got most of the wood off. We're going to test that end. That looks real close to 11:30 seconds. If it isn't, then you can adjust that at this point in time. You might want to move it up, you might want to move it down. Now what we want to do is get this end tapered to about 5/16 of an inch. What we will do is loosen the thumb screw on the cam here. We're going to move that about halfway and tighten it back up. And then we're going to sand some more off. like we still got a ways to go. So let's go ahead and move that cam. And as you're adjusting this, you're going to get a feel for how far to go. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be okay going all that way, so let's give that a try. Still looks like we've got a little bit of a distance to go. I'm going to put the shaft back in and see if I can get a little bit more off of it here. So what I did was I moved the adjustment on the belt, which moved this belt over. I've got a little bit of spot here on the sanding belt that's got some stain, and that's one thing you really don't want to do when you get going on this is use a lot of stained or shafts with paint or finish on them. So that's got me very, very close. But it's not quite as far as I want it to be. So what I will do at this point in time is I'm going to return this to vertical, remove my stop, insert my field tip, but this time I'm just going to go ahead and push that right down onto the sandpaper. I don't need that spacer. So that got me right down to where I would like it. So what you will want to do is spend a little bit of time making your adjustments. You're going to make them in small increments and keep going until you get that taper to where you want it to be. Now one thing that I have noticed here on this taper is this is longer of a taper than I typically like. So you may be fine with that. So if you are, that's great. But what I'm going to do is make an adjustment back here and show you how this end works. This time I'm going to insert a little bit more paper to raise that up a little bit higher. Let's install our guide. That'll help. Now, as you can see, we've got a much shorter taper. It's about 6 inches long or so. And so what we can do to lengthen that taper is we'll adjust this cam, and that will lengthen out our taper. We made that a little bit longer, and we can go back and forth and make those adjustments using our piece of paper and our field tip, and then we can get exactly what we want for our tapers. What I will tell you is if you're going to double taper your shafts, the gripper will not hold a shaft that's been tapered to 5/16. It will not hold it securely. So you need to taper the bigger end first, and then you can taper the other end. Now that you know what you're doing, you've got everything adjusted, you've practiced, you've ruined a few shafts. Now you can get your good shafts and go to work. When they're done, you will find that the taper is very, very smooth, and you really don't have to do anything to them except finish them up. If you have gunked up your sanding belt the way I have during the demonstration, there are a few things you can do to take care of that situation so you can taper your shafts. The first and the easiest thing to do is turn on your sander and use the tensioning knob and move that sanding block or the sanding belt in or out, and you'll have a new area on the sand belt to use. The second thing you can do, and this works on sanding belts or on discs that are just full of the wood that you've been sanding, and you can get yourself a sanding belt eraser. You can probably buy these locally if you live in a place that has some woodworking supply houses, or you can do a search on the internet for sanding belt eraser and you'll find them there. The way you use this, turn on your sander and just hold the eraser against the belt. There's a lot of chunks of rubber around, but what you will see is that the sanding belt is now a lot cleaner. It did not remove the areas that have the finish embedded in the sanding grit. That won't work, but it will clean up just regular wood sawdust. One more thing you can do is take the belt off and reverse it. Now there is one caveat to that. If you're using a belt that has arrows on it that indicate the direction of travel. You cannot reverse this belt. If you do, you run the risk of tearing that belt apart because of the way it's constructed, and you could do some damage to your machine or your shafts. This belt has no arrows in it, so I'm just going to go ahead and reverse it and reinstall it. The last thing we can do is loosen the screws on the back of the sander. And then we can move the taper tool in or out. As we need to. There we go. Retighten that. Now, if you do that, you will have to go through the setup procedure again and make sure that your distances between the taper tool and the sanding belt are back to where you need them. Here are 3 small combination sanders. The sander on the left is a Central Machinery. I bought it from Harbor Freight for $80. The sander on the right is a Rikon. It was purchased by a friend of mine at a local woodworking supply outlet. The cost was $140. The sander in the middle is available at Home Depot, and it's $120. A friend of mine, when he finds out what I have found out, is not going to be real happy. The Ryobi sander is basically a clone of the Rikon, or vice versa. The only difference that there appears to be is the base is taller on one than the other. All of the other parts appear to be interchangeable. The Central Machinery sander will require you, if you want to use that one, to install a piece of graphite cloth. And if you add the cost of the graphite cloth and the adhesive, you're probably going to be looking at a total of about $95. So that's the cost comparison between the 3. If you're going to be using your sander to do other woodworking tasks, the difference between these 2 sanders is that the Ryobi has a vacuum pickup port for a dust collection system. You can plug in a shop vac or another vacuum system to collect the dust. The Central Machinery sander has no dust collection on it. The Harbor Freight model is a bit underpowered if you're going to be doing other woodworking tasks. I actually stalled out the motor as I was sanding down the shaft guide. The Ryobi appears to have plenty of power. Other than that, the taper tools will work for tapering your shafts on any of these machines. There are similar machines that are available from other manufacturers, and as long as they're similar in configuration, they should work. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your interest in Tim's Taper Tools.